Well, obviously, we've been robbed of a lot of games thus far with the Vegas Golden Knights, and I love live NHL hockey. I try to go to as many Vegas Golden Knights games as I can. And the guy joining us on the line right now, certainly one of the best play-by-play voices in the NHL. He does such a great job for the Vegas Golden Knights. He is Dan Duva. Dan, thank you so much for joining us, sir. How are you?
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much for the kind words. But first things first, I thought the Mark Levin impersonation was fantastic. That was underrated. Very, very good. Mr.
Dan, are you?
I can't do it. I can't do
it. We have to agree to disagree on that one, Dan.
Dan, are you a liberal? Okay, I'll stop that. Anyway, I appreciate that, Dan. Thank you.
Scratch your head on that one.
Well, Dan, you got a good set of pipes. I'm sure there's a few impersonations you've done in your time, no?
Oh, when I was younger, growing up in New Jersey, Marv Albert doing the Knicks, doing the Rangers. Yeah, I mean, I've done some Marv Albert impersonations over the years. That's for sure. Maybe a little Vin Scully, but it's very bad.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Well, Dan, let's start off talking a little hockey. We haven't talked, obviously, a lot about the Knights recently because, well, there's no games going on. A lot of people that I've talked to that cover the team, members of the media, some members of the organization have told me, yeah, you know what, there's probably not going to be much of an NHL season, and we're just hoping that there's even going to be a playoffs. So what's your opinion on that? What have you heard? What have you seen from people? What have you heard, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in terms of what I've heard, there's not too much to go on other than what Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, has said, which is they have every intention of awarding the Stanley Cup this year with integrity. Now, you can read into that and determine or decide on your own what with integrity means. Does that mean you got to play all 82 games? Does that mean the Stanley Cup playoffs should be 4 rounds, best of 7 as it normally is? Or can you hedge on that? Can you eliminate or shorten the rest of the regular season? The Golden Knights, for example, have played 71 out of their 82 games. But not everybody plays the same number of games at the same time. So some clubs have played more than others, and that leads to who makes the playoffs if you just chop it off. Do you go by points or points percentage? That's significant because if you were to start the playoffs and go by points percentage, the Golden Knights would play the Nashville Predators in the first round. But if you were to go by points, Nashville would be out, Winnipeg would be in, and the Jets would play the Golden Knights in the first round. So that's a big distinction to make. And you think about going into the playoffs, it makes sense for the Golden Knights to look ahead because, you can certainly hope for a full 4-round postseason Stanley Cup run. But if you're the Detroit Red Wings, I mean, you've been long since eliminated. So there's a few different mindsets to go about here. But I think that everybody is just hoping that it comes back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and let's go with that, Dan. Assuming that it does come back, do you think that there's even going to be fans in the stands? I mean, best case scenario, if we see the playoffs, do you think fans are even going to be able to go to the games? I know that's a tough question for you to answer, but what do you think, hypothetically speaking?
Right. Well, I think back to what happened, and I mentioned earlier that I grew up in New Jersey. So I was in high school when September 11th happened, and to see Mike Piazza hit that home run in the first baseball game back in New York, and even as a Mets fan, when the Yankees got to the World Series, I think one of the coolest moments that I've ever seen in sports was when George Bush threw out that perfect first pitch in the World Series. I mean, that was just tremendous. And can you imagine if those moments had happened without fans in the seats?
Yeah, true.
We wouldn't have nearly the same appreciation for them. Sports is not just about the competition on the field. It's about the community experience and the people that support the teams. And I'm sure for the players, too, if you score a big goal in overtime, does it really feel the same if there's nobody cheering for it?
Yeah, so that's a great point.
I can't imagine them playing meaningful hockey games without fans in the stands. You just hope that, that we're in a position in terms of health that people are willing to go to the games and that's not a hesitation.
That is such a great point. It's different when the fans aren't there, different in a very big way. So I want to ask you something else. As you know that, there's been rumors circulating about the possibility of maybe even an NBA playoff type system played here in Las Vegas. But people that oppose it, I've talked to a lot of basketball people that say, listen, the product isn't going to be very good. These guys are working out in their homes and stuff, but the product isn't going to be very good. If you put these guys back out there on the floor and they haven't had enough time to prepare, it's just not going to be a great product. Do you think that would also apply to the NHL, that if they rush things a little bit, assuming that it's safe for them to be out there, that the product won't be as crisp and it won't be as good if they get things going when maybe they shouldn't?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a degree of rust to consider, but it's also worth considering that it would be equal for everybody. That's why I
and that's a good point.
For play-in games. They've talked about, oh well, those teams that might be out of the playoffs, we should have an extra round to see who can make it in. Well, those teams that play those quote-unquote play-in games would be an advantage rather than the perceived advantage of a bye that we normally see in early rounds of sports playoffs, because those teams that play obviously would have the opportunity to shake the rust off. But when the NHL has originally looked at the CDC guidelines, there were, again, the numbers have changed, but initially you were looking at 60 days before you could resume large gatherings, and therefore 45 days before the teams would be allowed to start practicing as a group. In other words, in the league's mind, you would want a couple of weeks, maybe 10 days, for the players to get back on the ice, get back to the cities where they are playing. Because now it just so happens, Vegas being a great place to live, a lot of the Golden Knights have stayed local. I think only Alec Martinez has gone back to Los Angeles, where he was traded from. But you got to get the guys on the ice a little bit, and I think that it's, as long as it's equal, as long as no team has a competitive advantage by playing extra warm-up games or something, I think it's okay.
So the city of Toronto just deemed, they said every single event is canceled until June 30th. Do you think that would have an adverse effect on bringing the NHL season back? And when do you believe, June, July, when do you believe that the season, assuming that it continues, when do you think it'll come back?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine, I suppose. When it comes to looking that far ahead, and I am certainly not in a position to contradict what the folks in Toronto say, but I believe that they would also have the ability to countermand that date. In other words, if things improve and the NHL wants to go forward and Toronto is a holdup, assuming they are in the playoffs, I would imagine they could revisit that. But you talk about June, maybe July. I think that's sort of the ballpark that we're hoping for. Maybe the teams can start practicing in mid-June, and you can start rolling by the end of the month or early July. I mean, again, I have no basis for that other than my own feel and following the news and listening and reading what everybody has said.
So, Dan, you're around my age. We've been around the game of hockey a long time. And I've always said that I think a professional hockey player, some of these guys are some of the best athletes in the world. Their physical conditioning, just their athletic ability. So with that being said, obviously these guys can't get on an ice rink. It's not like they can go skate anywhere. How the heck are they keeping in shape? I mean, I would imagine that they have their own workout regimens at home, but how the heck are these guys going to be able to stay in shape when they can't get on the ice and they can't skate? I mean, this is difficult.
Yeah, you're right, and it's the one aspect of hockey that the other sports aren't very much concerned with. If you're a basketball, football, or baseball player, or any of the other sports, you can go outside, you can go for a run, you can work on whatever muscle group is appropriate to your sport. It's hard to replicate skating on ice with anything you might do in the gym. So you're right on that, and that also goes to show the evolution of the off-season training for the NHL athlete. Back in the day, and this is true for other sports, but training camp was to get back in shape after having taken the summer off, because in the old days, a lot of players, baseball, hockey, et cetera, they had off-season jobs because they needed to. So training camp was really to get back in shape. And now, guys do spend time in the off-season skating, but they don't skate the entire summer. Normally when the season ends, depending on how far you go, you take some time completely off, and then you start to build it back up again in terms of getting on the ice so that when the training camp does begin, you are pretty close to the shape you want to be in. But also keep in mind that the NHL preseason is pretty short in terms of they practice only a few days, and then they play their first preseason game. It's not as though there's a couple of weeks before they start playing NHL preseason games. They play 7 preseason games, the Golden Knights have, but that pretty much is the training camp with a practice basically in between the games.
Fair enough. Well, Dan, before we let you go, I can't let you go that easily. I have to hear at least 5 seconds of Marv Albert. I'll give you mine first because mine's terrible, and then I'll let you go right after. All right, here's my Marv Albert. Ewing, yes, and it counts. It sounds like he's on the toilet. That's the best way. Yes, Ewing. Okay, that's it for me, Dan. All right, go ahead. I'm putting you on the spot, man.
All right, let's see. Starks able to get inside the kick out. Houston for 3. Yes.
That was really good.
That was outstanding.
You should have been an NBA Jam back in the day.
So what Dan, what year would that be? Starks Houston, what year would that be?
Oh, yeah, I don't know, what, 96 or something?
It was around the same time Reggie Miller was in his head and Spike Lee was acting like a buffoon, and Patrick Ewing missed a layup in the playoffs for them to not – yeah, about that time. Me and Dan are from the East Coast. Yeah, we remember that game.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We were spoiled listening to some great announcers. And
while Charles Oakley looks on.
Very best.
Yeah, that's true. So, Johnny Most is another one that comes to mind. There were so many great announcers, particularly on the East Coast. Well, I'll tell you what, Dan, you're one of them, and now you're on the West Coast. We appreciate you taking some time to join us. You really do a great job. And by the way, I want to thank the organization while I have you on. The money that they have donated, the Vegas Golden Knights, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, I think it was $500,000 to help people, T-Mobile. I mean, that needs to be covered because what this organization has done is nothing short of incredible, right?
Yeah, no, you're right, and it's good of you to mention it. Bill Foley sort of led the charge. Marc-Andre Fleury himself putting in $100,000, but that number of $500,000 was just the beginning. Bill Foley, it hasn't been officially announced yet, but Bill Foley, with some of his other businesses, is putting together another sum to put toward some good causes with the different businesses and causes here in Las Vegas in particular. So there's more to come.
Yeah, they need to be commended for that. Dan, thank you so much for joining us at such a difficult time. We really do appreciate you and hope to have you on again there once the season gets back going, hopefully sooner than later. Dan, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Best to you and best to you listening.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan.